Flash and
What am I fucking looking at?
take down the Kingpin in the beat-em-up side-scroller The Punisher, and more. Flash and
I don't think people fully appreciate the magnitude of Golden Era Capcom and how innovative they were and how they single-handedly forged almost all of my favorite genres, from beat-em-ups to fighting games to character action and everything in between. Golden Era Capcom, beginning with Final Fight in 1989 and ending arguably around the release of Devil May Cry 3 in 2005. Resident Evil 4, by the way, came out 1 month before Devil May Cry 3. Talk about an insane year for the company. But I would say from that era of the early 90s to the mid 2000s, Capcom were on another level in terms of the output and quality of their games. And it's something I don't think we've seen many other developers be able to compete with, because not only were Capcom putting out really innovative, awesome titles, but they're also putting out really solid, well-made titles at such an impressive pace that a lot of them got lost in the shuffle. And I think that is absolutely the case with today's game and today's video, which is the Punisher Arcade, which is finally being released from licensing jail in the upcoming
Capcom vs. Marvel Collection.
I know everyone's excited about Marvel 2, and that's great for the Marvel 2 players.
Flash and
But when I saw Punisher was also being included in this collection, I was like, oh yeah, not a lot of people are going to be talking about the Punisher, but they should be, hence today's video. So let's talk about what makes the Punisher such an awesome beat 'em up and how I still think it is innovative and ahead of the curve to this day, as in beat 'em ups coming out in the year 2024, 2023, and upcoming years are still fairly behind what Capcom was doing in their golden era, because this was an arcade exclusive. Unfortunately, I don't think many modern beat 'em up fans are aware of it or played it that much, and I've noticed a trend among modern beat 'em up fans where they definitely tend to be drawn to the console side of beat 'em ups like Streets of Rage and all that sort of thing, and don't really look into this era of beat 'em ups nearly as much as they should be. And if there is a beat 'em up that I would love modern developers to take a look at and take inspiration from, it is absolutely the Punisher. First of all, the graphical presentation, the style. I'm not a big Marvel guy, but if there was one Marvel character that I do think is actually pretty cool, it would be the Punisher. And unfortunately, you don't get much of that gritty, violent, morally ambiguous type of stuff out of Disney-owned Marvel these days. But anyway, I'm a big fan of the Punisher, but outside of the character and the presentation, this game is well worth looking at in terms of its gameplay and game design, because I think Capcom were just competing with themselves during this era. Konami were starting to catch up and make really cool beat 'em ups in their own right, but I think it's safe to say that Capcom were always a step ahead of the competition, and the best peers to the quality of their games is their own games. So it is interesting to play one of the most innovative, important games of all time, Final Fight, and see how that game created the entire template for the beat 'em up genre. And then from that point, Final Fight was so solid and fundamentally well made that Capcom had to sit down and think, all right, how do we make good variations on this formula, because it's just too strong to outright replace. So instead, we'll just do our best to make variations and ideas on the theme of Final Fight. And I think the variation of the Punisher is one of my favorites. Mechanically, the way this game is put together and the way it works is one of the best beat 'em ups of all time, in my opinion, in terms of its mechanics and ideas. And I think it is actually kind of shocking that no modern beat 'em ups have looked at the Punisher and said, yeah, let's just copy that, because there's so much left on the table with this game. So many great ideas that I absolutely love and I think are genuinely an interesting, perhaps, improvement to the Final Fight formula in some ways. So I'm really excited to talk about that. So let's begin by talking about the main bread and butter of what makes the Punisher the Punisher. And that is definitely the combination of the role mechanic and the gun mechanic. The roll mechanic is incredibly cool, and you can see it as a precursor to a similar type of mechanic in a lot of modern action games these days. I won't mention any particular ones. But I think that even if the roll mechanic of the Punisher didn't directly influence modern action games, which it might not have, it still is showing that Capcom were thinking about these concepts and coming up with these concepts well ahead of everyone else. And it's actually shocking how well developed the roll system of the Punisher is, where not only are you able to use the roll to navigate around the screen vertically and horizontally in a way that other mechanics and beat-em-ups haven't been able to do quite as well. Like running, you can run horizontally, and I love run mechanics, but the roll mechanic I think is even cooler, because not only can you roll horizontally, but you can roll and then use the momentum of the roll vertically, which is a big deal because it utilizes the pseudo 3D belt scrolling perspective of the 2D beat-em-up a lot better than its peers, and a lot better than modern beat-em-ups coming out these days. Because what's really great about the rolling mechanic of the Punisher is not only are you able to roll horizontally and vertically, like I said, and I'm pretty sure you do get iframes on the beginning of your roll. It's very hard to test, but I did it in front of a bunch of knife guys over and over, and I noticed that at the startup of your roll, you almost never get clipped, but at the end, you will get clipped. So I believe the way it works is very similar to a lot of modern action games now, where the beginning of your roll has iframes, the end of your roll doesn't have iframes. Is this sounding familiar? In other beat 'em ups, the way the sidestepping rolling mechanic works is you mostly play in a 2D lateral plane, and then when things start to pile up on you, you kind of jump upward or jump downward into a new plane and then address things on that new plane. That is how the vertical system of most beat 'em ups work. It's like a static sidestep that you employ. In the Punisher, however, because you're able to so precisely control that roll, and you're pretty much able to go in that diagonal roll at any point of time, it opens up a much more free-form feel to the spacing. And at times, it feels like you're playing a real 3D game, rather than having that sort of linear grid-based feel that most other beat-em-ups have. The Punisher feels like you can precisely get exactly where you need to be, both vertically and horizontally, at any given point of time, and then you're also able to utilize that roll for iframes. It opens up the mechanics of the game to allow the player to do things in the Punisher that you simply cannot do in other beat 'em ups. Like in the Punisher, you can run up to an enemy, roll around his entire hitbox, and grab him from the other side. Same thing with groups of enemies. You're able to maneuver around groups of enemies in the Punisher perhaps better than any other beat 'em up that I can think of. So in terms of movement mechanics, the Punisher has this great freeform feel because of how well developed the roll is. You use the roll offensively to accelerate your movement and get in position, and then you use the roll defensively to escape enemies trapping you or to get around nasty situations. And so this is what I think is a deep mechanic that you use for both offense and defense, and how you utilize the roll greatly informs your playstyle and experience with the game. And for me, I love the roll. I love the freedom it allows the player. In my playstyle is to utilize the roll as aggressively as possible, which then translates over to the second unique mechanic of the Punisher, the gun system. Oh my god, the gun system of this game is incredible, and I'm shocked, again, that we haven't seen it appear in other beat-em-ups in this form since then that I can think of. So the way the gun system of the Punisher works is very important to understand, because once you understand it, you'll love it. I'm sure of it. You'll love it once you understand how it works. When you first start playing, though, and you don't understand how the gun system works, you might think, oh, this is a little weird, or what's going on here? So let me go ahead and explain how the gun system of the Punisher works. There are two types of guns in this game. There are the limited ammo, just normal item drops that you see in most other beat 'em ups, like Alien vs. Predator, where you beat an enemy with a gun, he drops the gun, you pick it up, it has limited ammo. Nothing super unique or interesting about that, but still something you use quite a bit for routing. But more importantly is the second type of gun, which is your unlimited auto-locking pistol. And the way this works is that the pistol, unlike how it appears when you first start playing, does not have an ammo limit. It is an unlimited shot, just like a shmup. And the way it works is there's this auto crosshair that comes on screen and auto targets enemies. You can kind of influence it with your positioning, which becomes an advanced strat that you definitely utilize later on when you're going for 1cc's. But for the most part, the gun just auto locks onto, whatever's nearby, and you auto target it and fire. You do not need to be lined up horizontally like the other gun type. You can be off axis and it will still hit. Why does this matter? Remember back to the roll mechanic. Remember back to how I said you can use the roll to precisely place yourself diagonally on screen. Why this matters and what makes Punisher feel so cool is that when you combine together the free movement of the roll system and then the semi-free aiming of the auto-locking pistol, this shit is a third-person shooter. The Punisher is Gungrave before Gungrave existed. And when you get into certain boss fights or certain sections of the game that are really emphasizing on the pistol and the targeting, it feels incredible. It feels like you're playing Sin and Punishment or Dead to Rights or Gungrave or something like that. It has a more modern action game feel than something you would expect from an arcade game on the
CPS.
And my favorite moment of this is the tank boss fight of Stage 3. I think this is easily the best boss fight of the game and perhaps one of the best boss fights in all of beat 'em ups. And the way it works is it's full-on shooter mode where you're rolling, you're jumping, you're aiming, you're having to deal with this guy zooming around the screen, launching missiles at you. You got mooks trying to shoot you. It's really dynamic and fun. And yes, you can get a little cheesy with it, where you use the desperation attack to iframe through the missiles and stuff like that. But even with that, the boss fight is still on hardest mode, challenging enough to make you move around the screen and get aggressive with it. The flamethrower is a nasty hitbox that definitely tests your ability to precisely control your roll around attacks. So that's a huge highlight for me. What the limitation of the gun mechanic is, by the way, because you're probably wondering, okay, this is an auto-targeting pistol with unlimited ammunition. What keeps this mechanic in check? What makes this game a beat-em-up? Why punch someone when you can just auto-target them from a distance with a pistol? Pistols beat fists, it turns out. The limitation on the mechanic is that it is only active when other gun-type enemies are on screen. So once you kill all the gun-type enemies with your pistol, you automatically put your pistol away and go back to punching beat-em-up mode. And this is a very clever idea to create gameplay variety while still keeping the gun limited. As I talked about in my previous video of modern game design trends that I'm not a fan of, if the Punisher was a modern game, what they would do is they would create some sort of meter or overheat mechanic and say, oh, well, the gun overheats every so often, or you need ammo or meter to use the gun. You know that's what modern devs would do here. But Capcom were thinking about it more deeply and realized, well, if we want the gun sections to feel like real shooters, we want it to be fundamentally naturally balanced to be contained within these sections. And even on a surface level, this is a beautiful solution. Keep the gun mechanics contained to the enemy type, but let them be free when you're actually supposed to be using them. I love this, but that's not all the Punisher does. This is not all Capcom has up their sleeve, because they realize an interesting dynamic that occurs. And if you're a strong player, maybe you're already picking up on what this interesting dynamic is, which is, well, what would happen if you used the melee mechanics of the game to not kill in the gun sections, but rather to move and space enemies and keep them alive? And this is where the game gets really fun. So the routing of the Punisher is, on the surface level, what you'll see in my 1cc hardest, because I was just gunning my way through the game, is you go through, you kill the enemies, in the sections that they belong in. But if you want to get real cool with it, what you can do is you can intentionally keep some of the gun guys alive and carry them into sections where they're not supposed to be, and then go free with the gun on the beat 'em up enemy sections. There's this great strat of doing this with a robot enemy at the very final enemy rush before the boss. I didn't use this strat because the routing is actually kind of complicated, and I was kind of being lazy. But the strat is brilliant and genius, and the game does recognize that this is a phenomenon, because Capcom then starts to build in these dynamics into the later boss fights, where the first boss fights, you just kind of beat them up and stuff like that. But the later ones, they start bringing in gun enemies, and then they start making the melee attacks of the bosses really powerful and overwhelming. And so a very viable and interesting strategy that develops in the later game on the bosses is you intentionally move around the mooks with guns and try not to kill them, and instead use the gun on the bosses. It's so cool if you can pull it off. It's actually much trickier than it sounds, but if you can pull it off, I mean, there's nothing more satisfying, and that is one of my favorite dynamics in the entire game. And once you see people doing it in replays, you go, yeah, you know how to play the Punisher. You know how this game works. You know what's going on here. I love this concept, and I think this is something beat 'em ups still have not picked up on, and is still innovative to this day. In the year 2024, the time of this recording, there is no other beat 'em up that mixes together ranged and melee style combat better than the Punisher. If you're a modern beat 'em up developer these days, you could just copy the Punisher and make it a new game, and it would still be innovative and ahead of its time and still be really awesome, in my opinion. So I really wish modern beat 'em up developers would stop playing Streets of Rage. I mean, it's cool and everything, but there's other really innovative, cool beat 'em ups out there that have very ingenious mechanics, and Punisher is top of that list for me, between the gun mechanics and the roll mechanics. And then outside of these two, it's still made by Capcom, the creators of Final Fight, so the pure beat 'em up mechanics of the game are still really strong, and it's crazy how much stuff you can do. The Punisher is a grappler on high-grade methamphetamine. This guy can do everything. He's got punch strings into this manual axe kick that you can do, and the axe kick of the Punisher reminds me a lot of the roundhouse from Resident Evil 4, where that sucker sends enemies flying. It also does a good amount of damage on bosses, and then you can grab them, and once you grab them, you can pummel them. You can pummel them into an axe kick. You can carry them around as you pummel them. I love that. I love beat 'em ups where you can carry the enemies when you grab them. Shoutouts to Batman Returns. And while you're grabbing enemies and walking around with them, you can also jump into the air. You can jump into the air and throw them at other enemies for crowd control. Or if you want to go for the high damage Hagger stuff, you can jump into the air and do pile drivers with them for crowd control. And if that's not enough for you, you can also pile drive them into a throw loop because of your roll movement. And if that's not enough, the Punisher also has wall mechanics. So not only can you throw enemies into each other, not only can you pile drive them onto the ground, not only can you do throw loops, but you can also knock them into walls and do straight up wall combos on them, Tekken 5 style. So the Punisher just does everything. It's a beat 'em up with all the stuff. You've got super jumps, you've got wall bounces, you've got wall kicks, you've got pile drives, you've got axe kicks, you've got a gun, you've got a flamethrower, you have iframe rolls, you've got freeform movement. I still don't think I have a comprehensive list of all that is in this game, but it is a lot and it is beautiful. Capcom simply were not holding back with this one, and I know you all love your Streets of Rage 2 and your console-based beat-em-ups, but now that the Punisher is finally being released from licensing jail in the upcoming Marvel vs. Capcom Collection, you've got to try it. This is one of my favorite beat-em-ups of all time, and one of the most fun 1cc's and beat-em-ups I've played in a really long time. I could not recommend this game enough. 10 gold stars. Amazing. So huge recommendation from me. keep an eye out for the collection because I think the Punisher itself is worth it. You don't even need to play Marvel vs. Capcom 2. The Punisher, in my opinion, is worth the collection alone. And I will say, Capcom have been doing a good job with their collections and emulation as of late. I'm pretty impressed. Maybe they've been studying some M2. I don't know what it is, but if you look at like the Final Fight release, which you can get for like $2 now on the Stadium, they've been really upping their game in terms of the emulation of their arcade stuff. And so I'm hoping that will also hold true here with the Punisher. We'll see when it comes out. I'll probably talk about it then. But this is the Electric Underground, so I do have some critiques as much as I love this game. So the biggest problem with the Punisher is actually really simple, which is that the game is a little bit too much on the easy side. Now, for people newer to beat 'em ups or for the average beat 'em up player, I think the difficulty is going to be perfect for you. So if you're looking to get into beat 'em ups or you just want a really solid, fun beat 'em up, it's going to be perfect for you. Especially if you put it on hardest mode, which I'm using in the footage here. But in the long run, I really do wish it was a little bit more difficult. I think the problem with the game's difficulty isn't actually the boss fights. I think the boss fights are some of the best in the genre. The problem is actually with the stages. Now, the stages are well made, the enemies are well made, well developed, but the problem with the enemies and stages is simply that because the Punisher is such a Giga Chad and like can do everything, he's like the ultimate beat 'em up character, I think he just outpaces his enemies too much. He's like overpowering everything. So once you know the systems, once you know how to use the roll, the super jumps, you can crowd control with throws, you can drop people with pile drivers, you can knock enemies into the wall and wall combo them to death. Because the Punisher himself is so powerful, I think the game in the long run could have really benefited from one more difficulty mode, like ultra difficulty mode, and just added in a lot of really nasty, aggressive enemies. And on top of that, as much as I love the beat 'em up gun mechanic of this game, I wish the game played with this dynamic a little bit more and not just right at the end. I wish we could have gotten, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I really wish we could have gotten one more stage. I think this game could have really used one final penultimate stage of just hell, because the final stage of this game is challenging, but it's almost a little anticlimactic. Like, okay, come on, Capcom, give us one more just nasty gauntlet to get through. It doesn't have a real crushing pinpoint that a lot of really good beat 'em ups and really good arcade games have. You know, it doesn't have a hall of hell, basically. This game needs a hall of hell. It has some nasty boss fights, but it needs this one just terrible, evil, long gauntlet of enemies with maybe some previous bosses thrown in there. As it stands now, it's still a fantastic, fun, challenging play, but I think there's that one last stage, that last just grind you into the dust. I don't know if Capcom were unable to do that because of dev time limitations or simply because this is a popular licensed property. You know, Marvel in the 90s wasn't what it is today, but it was still popular. So maybe Capcom were like, hey, let's aim for a little bit more accessibility here. I kind of think that's the case. I do think overall it's still a very well-made, challenging game, but I think it could have used that final, okay, kid, now I'm taking your money sort of dynamic. Maybe this is something that ROM hackers could look into. I know there's ROM hacks for beat 'em ups. Maybe I can find or someone can make a hell mode ROM hack for the Punisher. Y'all made 1,000 ROM hacks for Final Fight and Streets of Rage 2. What about the Punisher? Show us some hell mode Punisher. That would be really cool. Still, overall, one of my favorite beat 'em ups. I'm very much looking forward to the collection because I'm very much looking forward to people actually playing this game and talking about it more. And maybe it will be more influential on modern beat 'em up stuff now, because as I was playing the Punisher, I was thinking, maybe someday I'll make a beat 'em up. And if I make a beat 'em up, this roll mechanic is going in. This gun mechanic is going in. It's going to be kind of like the Punisher, basically, because I really wish we'd see this design again iterated on. I'd love if Capcom would have made a Punisher 2, or even if they couldn't have used the Punisher license, used its like design, something like that. So absolutely a huge recommendation from me, and still innovative to this day. And if you enjoyed this review, check out my reviews of other beat 'em ups like Fight and Rage and Turtles Shredder's Revenge. And please like, subscribe, tell all your friends. And if you can, I'm going full-time very, very soon and going to be making lots of really cool content coming up this year. And so if you can support me on the Patreon, I'd really appreciate that. And also next week or so, when the test shirt arrives, I'm going to be doing a merch drive with really cool shirts that I'll be sending out to everyone. So if you could support the channel and keep an eye out for the merch drive, I'd also really support that as well. Adios, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Absconditis, Accepting Panda, Admiral Coconut, Anhold, AJA, Alexander Pfeiffer, Analgesic Productions, Anthony A, Arcade Hell, Arrow Viper, Au Alai, Autonamed, B-Lit, Beam Pit, Bo, Beto Dames, Boghog, Board Basmati, Borgie22, Chase Palumbo, Chris Yusufovich, Christopher R, Chronic Burnout 3, Claire Cliff, Clay Binkley, Climby Coyote, Coast, Colorboy, Cooksan666, Cook Some Soup, Des Audio, Dances with Incels, Darren Griffin, Dave Hansen, David Andrus, David Crespo, Delta Tango 6, Dingo, DJ420 Praise It, Drano, Dr. Bosky, Elbin Senisev, Elias Alonso, Eric Houdini, FCK, F Deluxe, Friskin, Frames Per Human, Francisco, Freckle Lord, Full Set, Game Boy Guru, Geese Machine, GPM, Gustavo Sanchez, Harun Khan, Hausu, Hero Death, Hiki Hime, HUD, JDab, Jake Ryan, Jack Walsh, Jacob Valenzuela, JLab, JBRPG, Jeffel, Jink Hans, John Kelly, John Longwalker, Josh Mayer, Jurgen, K, K2, Contain, Praise the Boys, Lord Harrington, Lorraine, Malaise, Mario Simic, Mark Sloan, Mars Bar, Matt O'Leary, Maz, Minung, Meister, Mewjam, Milo Shamel, Monroe, Nathaniel Davis, Neon Decker Games, Nile Agitis, Okla Kugels, Powell Parole, Pedro Perez, Poorly Written Protagonist, Psycho Blizzard, Queen Charlene, Ralph Trujillo, Raul, Rapido, Real Skeen, Brent Holtz Time, Retro Schmupper, Rory Starks, Rolf015, Ryan Bartlett, Scanline City, Segfault, Shazzy, Shmup Junkie, Sirapong, Sparta Mad, Spiders STG, Spongy, Steady AI, Steve Fiction, Street Magic, Superfunk, Temzarian, Taze Ryu, The Boot Rex, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, Tim French, Toho Rizardi, Travis Arbon, Tsugumo, 2YU, Twilight EX, Unikoi Roots, Ursua, Ushimushi, Vic Viper, Beautiful, Wabby Legs, What Is This, Zachary Patton, Zeal, and Zen Ryoku.